Hey, I'm Jordan.
And I'm Constance.
And we're going to do the sagebrush ecosystem. So, as you can see, I drew a map here. And on the mostly 11 states on the western side is where the sagebrush ecosystem is. And it's usually between 7,000 to 10,000 feet. So, in the sagebrush ecosystem, there's about 60% is public land. And it covers over 350 wildlife species.
The first plant that we're studying in the sagebrush ecosystem is the sagebrush. What a surprise! Anyway, so the main one in sagebrush ecosystems is called the big sagebrush, and it's just like the main one. Anyway, there are 21 species of sagebrush in Colorado, and they mainly live in cold desert areas with sandy soil. The plant at the end of its leaves has like 3 teeth things, which is how you identify it. And then the leaves are small, gray, and hairy, and they're wedge-shaped and strap-like.
The next plant we're going to be studying is sagebrush grass. Sagebrush grass is native to Colorado, and it's also endangered, mostly due to the building of houses on flat land. Sagebrush grass relies on the sagebrush plant, and it also looks like it's really smooth, and it has a multi-balanced stem. It usually grows about 3 to 30 inches in height, and it grows in big groups. This is kind of what it looks like, but imagine multiple of those everywhere.
Okay. The next species is the Medusa head. The Medusa head is an invasive species, so it is from Eurasia, and it was brought to the U.S. in the 1880s, and it thrives in the U.S. and Colorado specifically because it has a similar climate as Eurasia does. So it has warm and dry summers and then cool and moist winters. It generally takes over places that are already dying, or it will live in a place that's not quite dead and wait for resources to open up before it starts invading, just because, that's how it does it. And the way that it invades is it exploits soil and moisture resources and then just takes everything. And it has a thin stem, and then it has hair-like leaves on the top of it that are soft and loose.
Next and last plant we have is tumbleweed. This is the annoying stuff that goes across the road when you're driving or when you're stepping and it gets all pokey. Tumbleweed, you have to think. So tumbleweed is extremely invasive. It was actually native to Russia and brought over. Even though it's really annoying to us, it actually soaks up the depleting uranium from battlefields and stuff, where they test out things. Tumbleweed will come up, and that's good for the environment. It's also an annual plant, so what happens with tumbleweed is it grows, and then once it gets big enough, and it just dies because it gets cold outside, and it'll roll all over the place, and its seeds are in little pods, the pokey things, and it just rolls all over and puts the seeds everywhere.
The first animal that we studied was deer and elk. They are pretty much the same because they're both in the deer family, so we just smushed them together. Deer and elk are grazers, so they eat a variety of plants, especially the sagebrush. They travel in herds, and they migrate to the sagebrush ecosystems in the winter because the sagebrush is so tall that it pokes out of the snow and is easier to eat. And it also attracts the sun, which warms up the snow around it, which makes it easier for them to burrow in the snow around the sagebrush to get other plants that are underneath the snow.
Pronghorn is the second animal we're going to study today. So pronghorn primarily don't live in the sagebrush ecosystem, but they do like to roam around there. And they like to do their mating season in there. It's also a giant part of their diet. Pronghorn are herbivores. which means they primarily eat plants. Also, during the winter, pronghorn usually like to come down to the sagebrush ecosystem to eat because that's where it stays above the snow. So they have a really thick outer layer of fur to keep them warm during the winter.
The next animal that we studied were the pygmy rabbits. And the pygmy rabbits are very, very, very tiny. They're also the only rabbits to dig their own burrows, but they can only live in sagebrush ecosystems because of their size. The sagebrush ecosystem provides their entire diet. All they eat is sagebrush. And the sagebrush provides a covering that protects them from predators so that they can't see them. So if sagebrush ecosystems were to completely get wiped out, so would the pygmy rabbits, because they're too tiny to cross the road, and they're also just too small to live anywhere else without being seen and then getting devoured very quickly.
So the next animal we're going to do, and the final animal, is coyotes. I think coyotes are really cool. So coyotes are mostly ecosystem floaters. They go where their food goes. They've actually been recently more attracted to the sagebrush ecosystems because we've had a really big overpopulation of white-tailed rabbits. So wolves are their predators, and they eat rabbits, lizards, flowers, birds. It's really interesting because when coyotes hunt, they have a bunch of different techniques, but my favorite technique is they have someone that plays hurt, and they howl like a little baby, and then something will come and check on it, and then the rest of the pack jumps in and attacks.
So the sagebrush food web, based on the animals and plants that we discussed, it all starts with the sagebrush. Obviously, everyone eats the sagebrush. This would also be the sagebrush grass and the Medusa heads and the tumbleweeds. The rabbits and the deer and the elk all eat the sagebrush. The deer and the elk are eaten by humans and also by wolves. The rabbits are eaten by the coyotes, and the coyotes are also eaten by the wolves. So some of the threats to the sagebrush ecosystem are first fires. Since it's a fairly dry ecosystem, fires will pretty much wipe it all out really quickly, which is a problem because of all the fires that were happening earlier this year. Another threat to sagebrush ecosystems are human development. Obviously, as land is taken over and humans build houses on top of the sagebrush ecosystem isn't going to continue living. And the final threat to the sagebrush ecosystem are invasive species, because invasive species obviously invade the ecosystem and take it over so that the sagebrush will no longer be existent. So, in conclusion, we need the sagebrush ecosystem. It is very important to Colorado, and it is very important to everything else in Colorado. So, the sagebrush is known as a nurse plant, and that mainly means that other plants rely on the sagebrush to continue living. So, if the sagebrush were to die, then so would all other plants, and since all the animals rely on plants, then rely on other animals, if the sagebrush died, would kill other plants, which then killed the animals, then everything would die.